Blues Creek bender, which I own, and I primarily use that bender, which is a simplified version of this. It's way more user-friendly for the kids. I primarily have that for the ukulele bending. Ed, I think, has one or two. I know Alan has a couple of those so that you can get double up on those bending operations. I started with the LMI because looking at most guitar benders out there, they have two columns on both sides, and you have to slide your material in through these two uprights. The advantage to this one is that you slide all your material in horizontally, and the actual press down is on a cantilever system. So when I put all my material in here, it slides in horizontally, and then I begin that bending process. The core machine itself is down here in this lower. It has this temperature gauge system and computer, what have you, that works all the electronics and heat sequences. But the forms themselves, these are interchangeable. So for instance, this form that I have is based off the OM, Martin OM, which I actually built. The first form I have is for the Dreadnought. I basically reverse engineered that to make this OM. I did buy my most recent purchase, and I didn't want to spend the time to make it, as I bought their jumbo version. Again, this is interchangeable, and these little culls that meet at the waist of the guitar shape are also interchangeable. So when I do this one, it has a much tighter radius than this OM. So you not only have to retrofit the actual bending form, but also these press down. When you also buy the donut form for that shape. So once you've done one side at a time, you can take that out and slap it in their form. And I built this based off this design here, which I drew up. All right. So when I get done with one of these sides, let's say, ooh, I just took this out. I can slap it right in here like this, clamp it, and let it dry overnight. I'm not going to deal with it that same day. And then I can go right to the next one and, go through that bending process. This particular machine is quite a bit more complicated than the Blues Creek. If you come over here, I'll show you what you have to do to make that happen. Alright, so here I just recently did a bend for the binding of some upcoming guitarists that I want to do. Alright, so for instance, this is a Honduran mahogany side, and I'm going to be applying this figured maple, fiddleback maple for a binding. I've laser cut this. I actually do this, I laser out 5 strips in case something goes wrong in the preparation of installing that binding, so I always have a backup. The nice thing about this is I can do 2 at a time. Alright, that's wide enough to get 2 at a time out, and that works out pretty well. Alright, when you get the LMI, it comes standard with spring steel, which is not stainless steel. I do believe they offer the stainless steel, and I would buy that because if you get condensation on there, you're going to get some rust built up. With the Blues Creek, I believe it comes standard with stainless steel. So you have to protect your material from the potential of rust interfering with that. So that's where you wrap it in some tin foil. I use the heavy duty stuff just for added strength. I don't know what my moisture content is on this, so as we had discussions earlier about Taylor and their bending methods, whether they wet material down or spritz it, depends on obviously years and years of research on their part. I don't have that information, so I'm just going to spritz it down anyways, just for, guaranteed, all right? So I like spritz this down both sides. You don't need a heck of a lot of water, just enough to create that steam and that heat combination. Wrap this up.
It doesn't have to be perfectly smooth, right?
And over several trials and errors, I always build in an extra inch more on my length, on my blanks, than what I know that I need for the actual guitar itself. And I've actually marked those with a Sharpie where to line up my ends for my bends. That way I know that when I come in at the waist, I'm going to have enough material here to get past center line and enough material to get past center line on the tail end of the guitar. And there's actually, this is a 2-blanket method, whereas the Blues Creek is only a single. All right, so this, I have a center line right here, which is right at my waist, and I'm going to put my waist blanket right on top, my center line lined up with that. There are a couple probes, wire probes, that are going to, this orange end is going to plug into the computer, and it has me basically a bare wire that I'm going to set on my foil to register temperature. And I have listed on here, because I always have to refer back to this, is left over, right under. It's my key concept. So I bring that idea over to here. So my left probe is going to be left over. It's going to be over this. So I'm going to grab one of these end wires, line this up. This is going to be on the top side, right here. My blanket sandwiches that, and I put a little clip on it to hold it in place. And then on the right side, right under, I'm going to locate this temperature probe on the underside. This will all become clear in a moment, I hope. Alright, so I clamp that, then bring my other spring steel, line it up with everything in place. Clamp that in place like that. Okay, you can now bring this whole unit, sandwich unit, over to the bender. I have a center line indicating right at the, basically the outer tangent point of my center cull for the waist. I'm going to line that center line right up with that. This is kind of the advantage of this over the Blues Creek, because I can slide things in. I'm not back and forth with a big wall of wood in front of me. Get that kind of lined up center. Again, do I need to be perfectly precise? Well, as best you can, but not really. Piece of steel that goes underneath here at the waist. Line that up like that. And reinsert. So I'm going to let this drape down so that all the steel and all the blankets kind of line up with the general form, the outside of the form. And then bring pressure down to get it tight. Again, I haven't put any moisture in there, so I don't really want to torque it. Then I can take these out, plug in my feed rollers. Again, this is far more labor intensive than Blues Creek. Put another one. Damn it. And then I tighten this down. I get some tension on these so that when I start rolling this, they're kind of basically, it's a silicone roller. I first want to start with the waist blanket. I plug this in, and then I find my leftover right under concept. So the leftover probe was going to measure the heat on my upper blanket because that was above. I plug this in, turn on the power, and then adjust my temperature. And you can see right here that it's reading 82 degrees in this case. I've made a couple notes here on the side. So my upper blanket, when I start the bending process, I want to, LMI recommends at 320 degrees, so I make that adjustment. Now I haven't turned on the blanket at this time. I've just turned on the machine and adjusting my temperature. So I'll bring this up to 320 degrees based on their recommendation. And it actually heats up pretty darn fast. And that's when I throw the blanket. Now, this blanket's going to be electrified and heat up to that. And as this is heating up, that's when I actually start bending, bringing this down nice and slow. By the time I actually get into the 300 degree range, I want to be fully down in the bottom of this valley, making this bend right here. This is what I'm doing first. Once I've established that I'm fully down, I turn that blanket off, actually I don't need to turn the power off. I switch blankets. It's a lot of switching of wires. That's the downside to this. You gotta be like fully engaged, tuned, and not distracted by anything. I change probes, turn it back on. Now change my big blanket temperature to 265 degrees. I don't expect you to remember this, but it's all, if you buy this, it's a really comprehensive manual that talks about this. It's pretty user friendly as far as that is concerned. As this is heating up, that's when you begin the slow rollout. Don't be too fast with this. Think slow. This can go slightly faster because it has a bigger radius to bend. I would take this a little bit slower in comparison as you roll this out. I will leave it at, and it will stop at that temperature that you set it. I leave it in that temperature for 20 minutes. So when it's all said and done, that whole bending process can take you about a half hour. If you're really in a hurry, take it out. You have your form right here that you can put it in there and get the other one going. All right, so by the next day, everything is exactly where you want it. As far as spring back is concerned, you're going to get a little bit of spring back. Okay, the wood wants to go back to its original form if it really wanted to, but heated it up. Once you actually, and I've cut this to size where I want it. Oh, it's always a good idea to mark your top edge, because when you get it out of the farm, it can be, depending on your wood grain, the way it's going, you might be kind of like, ooh, which one is up and which one's down. So I usually mark either with a Sharpie or something like that on the inside or the outside, some way of indicating that top edge, so that when you take it out, you know what you're going to be doing. All right, so you can sort of see that doesn't look like, so it's sprung back. Okay, if it really goes really out of whack, you can heat it up, moisten it, with some moisture, rebend it if you need to. Otherwise, put it exactly into your form that you've already have on hand. Let it sit at your blocks, your head block and your tail block, and get it into your final guitar form.
So like with the laminate, you really don't have to worry about that because it's not really spring back.
No.
So to build a guitar out of natural wood like that, you're going to have to put the blocks in while it's in the form, right?
Yes.
Right, so
On my form itself, I have a pole spreader. This week you used that spreader that was in here with the turnbuckle, and that's great. The LMI spreader is a full, it's like two turn things here, and it actually goes into the full upper valve and lower valve.
So when that comes out of the bender, you put it in the mold, you clamp the mold down.
Yeah.
You must have several, so you can do.
I don't. I just have one,
So
believe it or not.
You unclamp it, put the second one in? You put both?
No,
in the
I
same
just
time?
leave it in there until I'm ready.
Oh, okay.
But the other thing that you might want to consider is when you just, knowing that you have that top flat edge, not the curved bottom edge or contoured edge. When I set it down, I put it on a nice flat hard surface, and I make sure that when I put this in the form, whatever that edge is, it's totally flat against that. I don't like wishy-washy because that can twist the body. Does that make sense? And so I put it, knowing that where that 5 inch is, I think it's that one. Bring this in, clamp it, hold it in place.
All right, so cutting the edges, so obviously that you said you leave more than enough,
Yes.
so.
Yes. You
So-
can see my
so you
reference
just-
line
so
right
you
there
make
and
line-
right there
So you know where, okay, so you
Yeah.
cut it.
after the fact.
So
So it can, because I might be off and getting that original.
Okay,
in.
so you're clamping this tight.
Yes.
And then marking it.
Yeah, after it's had a chance, about a day to dry.
Okay. 'Cause that was something I had to, you know, because like, obviously I cut the things longer than I need to. And
Yeah.
all this stuff, I'm sure transfers over to ukuleles, right? Same
Yeah.
principle.
Yeah,
'Cause I have a
exactly.
wood fender.
That's what I do with my binding, my wood binding.
Yeah.
I carefully score that and snap it, and then dress the edge up when I, attach it to the guitar.
I heard
itself.
somebody had a question there earlier that made sense to me. So let's just say that you, with wood binding, I guess it's different, but like say you use plastic binding.
Mhm.
Do you want the finish on the binding too? Well, you scrape that off, right? Like, so you,
I usually put finish on the binding after the fact. I haven't had any issues with it. I prefer the wood binding, to be perfectly honest with you, because it's a natural look for me, and that's my.
yeah, I mean, I get it. I love Charlie Maple.
Yeah, you can sand it, you can shape it, and sculpt it, and I just prefer it myself.
Makes sense.
If you do plastic binding, you can finish over it as long as it has a scuff, so the finish will adhere.
Okay.
And if it's light colored, if it's white binding, you might find that the finish process smears color onto the binding.
Yeah.
And so then that's when we detail just lightly scrape the binding. And it doesn't matter if the binding ends up without finish on it. But if it does have finish on it, as long as it adheres, it's good.
Cool. Makes sense. Thank you.